It may be said, that an explanation is not fully adequate unless its explanans, if taken account of in time, could have served as a basis for predicting the phenomenon under consideration. It is this potential predictive force which gives scientific explanation its importance. Only to the extent that we are able to explain empirical facts can we attain the major objective of scientific research, namely not merely to record the phenomena of our experience, but to learn from them, by basing upon them theoretical generalizations which enable us to anticipate new occurrences and to control, at least to some extent, the changes in our environment. Hempel and Oppenheim, 1948, p.138-1. Carl Gustav Hempel 1905–1997 was a towering figure in logical empiricism and one of the most influential philosophers of science of the 20th century. He is best known for developing the deductive nomological DN model, also called the covering law model, which suggests that a scientific explanation is only valid if it shows how an event follows logically from general laws and specific initial conditions. Hempel also famously introduced the Raven paradox or Hempel's paradox to challenge our intuitions about how evidence confirms a hypothesis. He argued that observing a green apple and non-black non-raven logically provides a tiny amount of support for the statement all ravens are black due to the laws of formal logic. Beyond these, his work on confirmation theory and the theoretician's dilemma sought to provide a rigorous, logical framework for the way science functions, bridging the gap between abstract theory and empirical observation. Born on January 8, 1905, in Oranienburg, Germany, Carl Gustav Peter Hempel grew up in a family that valued empirical observation, a trait he reportedly displayed early on after a childhood bicycle accident led him to resolve never to drive a car. His academic journey was rigorous and expansive, as he studied mathematics, physics, and philosophy at the universities of Göttingen, Heidelberg, and Berlin. During his time at Göttingen, he was deeply influenced by the mathematician David Hilbert, whose quest for logical foundations in mathematics shaped Hempel's lifelong commitment to clarity and formal rigor. By the late 1920s, he became a key participant in the Berlin Circle and moved to Vienna for a semester to study with Rudolf Carnap and Moritz Schlick, immersing himself in the burgeoning movement of logical positivism. He completed his doctorate in 1934 under the supervision of Hans Reichenbach, but the rising tide of Nazism forced him to flee Germany just a week before Hitler assumed full power. He eventually emigrated to the United States in 1937, where he began the American phase of his career that would redefine modern philosophy of science. 1934 Beiträge zur Logischen Analyse der Wahrscheinlichkeitsbegriffs doctoral dissertation, University of Berlin. This foundational work, titled Contributions to the Logical Analysis of the Concept of Probability, marked Hempel's PhD thesis and represented an early, influential logical empiricist examination of probability concepts, laying groundwork for his lifelong interest in inductive logic, confirmation, and the logical structure of probabilistic reasoning in science. 1936 Über den Gehalt von Wahrscheinlichkeitsaussagen on the content of probability statements, an early German language article that explored the meaning and logical content of probability statements, contributing to the development of logical empiricism's approach to probability and serving as a precursor to Hempel's broader work on inductive inference and confirmation theory. 1936 with Paul Oppenheim, Der Typusbegriff im Licht der neuen Logik, the concept of type in the light of the new logic. This book-length study, co-authored with Paul Oppenheim, investigated logical typology and classification systems in science, applying modern symbolic logic to concepts of type and categorization, which influenced later discussions in scientific concept formation and taxonomy. Vagueness and Logic 1939, Philosophy of Science. This paper examines the logical consequences of vagueness in scientific and everyday language terms, analyzing how imprecise predicates affect logical inference and scientific discourse. 1942 The Function of General Laws in History Journal of Philosophy, a seminal early paper that argued for the application of general laws to historical explanation, serving as a precursor to the covering law model and asserting that historical events are explained through subsumption under universal laws, much like in the natural sciences. 1943 A purely syntactical definition of confirmation, an early formulation in confirmation theory. This work attempted to define confirmation in purely syntactical formal logical terms, contributing to Hempel's ongoing efforts to formalize how evidence supports scientific hypotheses. The Raven paradox, formally introduced in his 1945 Studies in the Logic of Confirmation, illustrates challenges in inductive confirmation. The hypothesis all ravens are black is logically equivalent to all non-black things are non-ravens. Observing a black raven confirms the first, observing a white shoe non-black non-raven confirms the equivalent second form, yet intuitively seems irrelevant. Hempel accepted the logical conclusion but noted it clashes with intuition due to background knowledge, e.g. the vast number of non-ravens versus ravens. This paradox spurred refinements in confirmation theory, including Bayesian approaches and Nelson Goodman's emphasis on projectable predicates. 1945 On the Nature of Mathematical Truth, American Mathematical Monthly. This article discussed the analytic character of mathematical truths, exploring their non-empirical status within the framework of logical empiricism and distinguishing mathematics from empirical sciences. 1945 Geometry and Empirical Science, American Mathematical Monthly. Here, Hempel examined the empirical status of geometric systems, arguing for their conventional or interpretive nature in relation to physical reality, building on debates about the foundations of geometry. 1945 With Paul Oppenheim, A Definition of Degree of Confirmation, Philosophy of Science, a collaborative paper introducing a quantitative approach to measuring the degree of confirmation that evidence provides to hypotheses, advancing formal inductive logic. 1948 With Paul Oppenheim, Studies in the Logic of Explanation, Philosophy of Science, Volume 15. This classic paper introduced the deductive nomological DN model of scientific explanation, widely known as the Hempel-Oppenheim or covering law model, which formalized explanation as a deductive argument subsuming events under general laws and initial conditions. 1950 Problems and Changes in the Empiricist Criterion of Meaning, Revue Internationale de Philosophie, a critical examination of verificationism and the logical empiricist criteria for meaningfulness, highlighting problems and proposing refinements to the empiricist criterion of cognitive significance. 1952 Fundamentals of Concept Formation in Empirical Science, International Encyclopedia of Unified Science, Volume 2, Number 7, a major monograph outlining the logical structure, criteria, and methods for forming empirical concepts in science, serving as a key text on the philosophy of concept formation. Review, Israel Scheffler, on Synonymy and Indirect Discourse. 1957, Journal of Symbolic Logic, a brief review engaging with issues in synonymy, indirect quotation, and the semantics of reported speech, showing Hempel's attention to linguistic puzzles in philosophy of language. 1958 The Theoretician's Dilemma, a study in the logic of theory construction in Minnesota Studies in the Philosophy of Science. This essay examined the role, justification, and challenges of theoretical terms in scientific theories, addressing tensions between observational and theoretical language. 1959 The Logic of Functional Analysis in Llewellyn-Gross, ed. Symposium on Sociological Theory. Hempel applied logical analysis to functional explanations in the social sciences, critiquing and clarifying their structure and limitations. 1960 Inductive Inconsistencies Synthese, a discussion of paradoxes and problems in inductive logic, exploring inconsistencies that arise in attempts to formalize inductive reasoning. 1962 Deductive Nomological versus Statistical Explanation in Minnesota Studies in the Philosophy of Science, Volume 3. This paper extended models of explanation to include statistical and probabilistic cases, contrasting them with the classical DN model. 1962 Maximal Specificity and Lawlikeness in Probabilistic Explanation, a refining paper on requirements for statistical explanation, emphasizing conditions like maximal specificity to ensure relevance and lawlikeness in probabilistic contexts. 1965 Aspects of Scientific Explanation and Other Essays in the Philosophy of Science. The Free Press, Hempel's most influential collection, gathering and revising major papers on explanation including DN refinements, statistical explanation, the Raven paradox of confirmation, and related topics in philosophy of science. 1965 Empiricist Criteria of Cognitive Significance, Problems and Changes revised version in Aspects of Scientific Explanation, an updated treatment of issues with empiricist meaningfulness criteria, incorporating earlier critiques and refinements. 1966 Philosophy of Natural Science Prentice Hall, a concise, widely adopted textbook introducing core topics in philosophy of science, such as laws, theories, explanation, confirmation, and concept formation. 1970 Various responses and contributions in essays in honor of Carl G. Hempel ed. Nicholas Rescher, included Hempel's replies to critics on themes like explanation and rationality, marking a reflective engagement with scholarly discussions of his work. 1983 Valuation and Objectivity in Science in R. S. Cohen and M. W. Wartofsky, eds Physics, Philosophy, and Psychoanalysis, a later reflection on the role of values in scientific objectivity, exploring how non-epistemic factors influence science while maintaining commitments to objectivity. 1988 Provisos, a problem concerning the inferential function of scientific theories in A. Grunbaum and W. C. Salmon, eds. The Limitations of Deductivism, discussed ceteris paribus conditions, idealizations, and provisos in scientific theories, highlighting challenges for strict deductive inference. After retiring from Princeton in 1973, where he held the Stewart Professorship from 1955, Hempel taught as emeritus at Hebrew University 1974 to 1976 and as university professor at Pittsburgh 1977 to 1985. He received numerous honorary degrees, e.g. from Princeton in 1979, University of Berlin in 1984, and was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, British Academy Corresponding Fellow, and American Philosophical Society. Princeton renamed its three-lecture series the Carl G. Hempel Lectures in 1989. The Philosophy of Science Association established the biennial Carl Gustav Hempel Award 2012 onward for lifetime achievement in philosophy of science. In 2005, his birthplace Oranienburg renamed a street Carl Gustav Hempel Strasse. Hempel died on November 9, 1997, in Princeton at age 92. His legacy endures in analytic philosophy of science, influencing generations through rigorous explication of explanation, confirmation, and rationality, though post-Kuhnian shifts toward historical contextual views tempered strict logical empiricism. Posthumous Collections, 2000 Selected Philosophical Essays ed. Richard Jeffrey, includes pieces from Hempel's early German period through his late career, with 4 essays appearing in English for the first time. 2001 The Philosophy of Carl G. Hempel, Studies in Science, Explanation, and Rationality ed. James H. Fetzer, a comprehensive volume with a full bibliography, major essays, and analytical introductions to Hempel's contributions. References: Zaltot, Edward N. ed. Behaviorism. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Gand Jour A, Lauterbach KW, Inductive Reasoning in Medicine, Lessons from Carl Gustav Hempel's Inductive Statistical Model, J. Eval Klintpracht, 2003, 92161, 9. Theories in Science. Pages.mtu.edu retrieved December 17, 2021. Carl Hempel Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Hempel. Dictionary.com unabridged online. N. D. Fetzer, James December 17, 2021. Carl Hempel. Inzal Edward N. ed. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Metaphysics Research Lab, Stanford University. Retrieved December 17, 2021. Mertzi, Morrow 2001. Hempel, Carl. Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Life. Retrieved October 8, 2024. Hempel, Carl G. January 13, 2000. Jeffrey, Richard ed. Selected Philosophical Essays. Cambridge University Press. p. 8. doi 10.1017 CB09780511815157. ISBN 978-0-521-62475-6. Bailey, Andrew 2002. Who was Carl Hempel? First Philosophy, Fundamental Problems and Readings in Philosophy. Broadview Press. p. 313. ISBN 978-1-55111-360-9. Hempel, Carl. Carl Gustav Hempel's Papers. Special Collections Department, University of Pittsburgh. Retrieved September 17, 2013. Carl G. Hempel Philosophy. Philosophy.princeton.edu retrieved December 17, 2021. Carl Gustav Hempel. American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Retrieved September 28, 2022. Essays in honor of Carl G. Hempel. A tribute on the occasion of his 65th birthday. Dordrecht, D. Riedel. 1970 pages v. Burkhardt, Ford November 23, 1997. Carl G. Hempel dies at 92, Applied Science to Philosophy. The New York Times. p. 44. Archived from the original on January 5, 2013. Retrieved October 7, 2010. Princeton, News, Philosopher of Science Carl G. Hempel dies. pr.princeton.edu retrieved October 8, 2024. Rasa, Syed Ahsan 2017. Theory of Scientific Investigation by Hempel and a Case of Semmelweis. Journal of Family Medicine and Primary Care. 62, 198-200. doi 10.4103 jfmpc.jfmpc_61_17. ISSN 2249-4863. PMC 574-9055. PMID 29302516. Hempel, Carl G., Oppenheim, Paul April 1948. Studies in the Logic of Explanation. Philosophy of Science. 15 135-175. doi 10.1086-286983. Jaster 185169. S2 SID 169244146. Hempel, Carl G. January 15, 1942. The Function of General Laws in History. The Journal of Philosophy. 39-2, Philosophy Documentation Center, 35-48. doi 10.230720176335. ISSN 0022-362X. Jaster 201-7635. Hempel, Carl G. 1945. Studies in the Logic of Confirmation. Mind. Lib 213. Oxford University Press OUP, 1-26. doi 10.1093 mindlib.213.1. ISSN 0026-4423. Hempel, Carl G. 1980. 1. The Logical Analysis of Psychology. The Language and Thought Series. Cambridge, Ma, and London, England, Harvard University Press. doi 10.4159 Harvard.9780674594623.c3. ISBN 978-0-674-59462-3. Further reading. Kitcher, Philip 2001 Carl G. Hempel 1905-1997 in Martinich, A. P. Sosa, David eds, A Companion to Analytic Philosophy 1 ed. Wiley, pages 148, 159, doi 10.10280470998656.ch12, ISBN 978-0-631-21415-1.